Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Bill. We're going to be in the 3rd edition Player's Handbook for this video. You can definitely see my copy is very well worn. We're continuing the War Magic series. So we're on level 1 arcane spells, and I've been breaking them up by schools of magic just because it's a little easier instead of filming like a 2-hour video. So we're covering 2 spell schools in this video. We're going to cover illusion and necromancy. Necromancy only has like 3 spells in it, and illusion has about 6. Let's see what those spells are now, and then we'll go and look at them in greater detail in the spell chapter and see if there's any interesting ways we can use it, or if there's any little house rule tweaks we could do to it to make it more effective in combat or more interesting to use. So with illusion, you got change self, which is a great thing for your players to use. And if you wanted to use that for an ambush, I can see that being very useful. You change your military's look, like a section of soldiers, and you send them off. Especially if they look like the enemy, they can come up, and then all of a sudden now the enemy's fighting on 2 different fronts and surprised from the one. Collar spray knocks unconscious, blinds, or stuns 1d6 weak creatures. I could see you creating a one-use like straw that you give your frontline soldiers or your second to frontline soldiers, and then just blowing that over the shoulder of the one that's in melee combat and just hitting them with that collar spray. Nistel's magical aura grants objects false magic aura. That one, I don't see that one being very useful because you also have Nistel's undetectable aura, makes magic items, masks magic items aura. So I don't really see those 2 being useful, but we might find a better use for it when we read the detailed description. Silent image creates minor illusion of your design. You could use that in a way as a summoning spell and have a creature appear next to somebody, especially if they're already engaged in combat, and that could freak the hell out of them and probably distract them enough that you could get an advantage. Ventriloquism, throw voice for 1 minute per level. That's always a fun one, especially when you have this area away from the guards yelling at them. They go that way, and then you come up and go the direction you want to go without being seen. The downside is I don't see that being useful on the battlefield. Cause fear. 1 creature flees for 1d4 rounds. Problem is that's a single target. That's the only problem with that. So, put cause fear on a bunch of ranged weapons. Arrows, crossbow bolts, sling bullets. If your soldiers that are 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th row deep in the shield wall use slings as their ranged weapon while still having their regular melee outfit, you could give them all sling bullets of it. If they launch those over the top of the wall into the enemy and it start hitting a decent amount of them every round, and those guys start breaking and running, well, now you've disintegrated a section of that fighting force, and you can just start going both ways and crush that wall. Chill touch. 1 touch per level deals 1d6 damage and possibly 1 strength damage. I'd say putting that on a weapon as well. Even if it didn't do the strength damage, it just did the 1d6 damage, that would increase the amount of damage the weapon's doing without having to make the weapon like +1 magical. So if you created ammunition of chill touch and pass that out amongst your group, the sling would do a d4 damage plus strength modifier, and then it would also do a d6 chill touch damage. And I could see that being very effective against the lower level soldiers. Ray of Enfeeblement. Reduces strength by 1d6 points plus 1 point per 2 levels. Put that on some ammo, and you can physically weaken their military as you hit them with it. So they take the ammo hit and take that little bit of damage, or a lot of bit of damage if you're using bows and crossbows. And in addition, their strength drops by d6. So potentially they could lose 3 modifiers, or the lowest would be a modifier if they were on an even number and you rolled a 1. So that's how I would use it with those brief descriptions. Let's actually look at the spells and see what we can see. See if it'll inspire anything extra. There it is. Lasts 10 minutes per level. Okay, so you make yourself, including your clothing, armor, weapons, and equipment, look different. You can seem 1 foot shorter or taller, thin, fat, or in between. You cannot change your body type. For example, a human caster could look humanoid, or like any other generally human-shaped bipedal creature. Otherwise, the extent of the appearance that changes upon you, you could add or obscure a minor feature, such as a mole or a beard, or look like an entirely different person. The spell does not provide the abilities or mannerisms of the chosen form. It does not alter the perceived tactical touch or audible sound properties of you or your equipment. So if you're wearing full plate and the image that you got isn't wearing full plate, you're still making full plate noises as you're walking and everything else. So that's something to keep in mind. But I could see this being used as a small strike force or a little bit bigger, like 20 to 50 unit group, all having these temporary change self things that when they activate them, they'll disintegrate when the time's up. But in the meantime, they look like the enemy, and then they join the enemy, and now they can ambush the enemy from within or act like they're reinforcing the enemy and then attack them from behind. Things like that nature. So there's change self. Color spray. It's a cone, close range, 25 feet plus 5 feet per 2 level. A vivid cone of clashing colors springs forth from your hand, stunning creatures, blinding them, or even knocking them unconscious. The closest 1d6 creatures in the cone are affected. The spell affects each subject according to its hit dice. Up to 2 hit dice, unconscious for 2d4 rounds, then blinded for 1d4 rounds, and then stunned for 1 round. Only living creatures are knocked unconscious. On 3 or 4 hit dice, they're blinded for 1d4 rounds, then stunned for 1 round. On 5 or more, they are stunned for 1 round. In addition to the obvious effect, a blinded creature suffers a 50% mischance in combat. All opponents have full concealment while you're blinded. You lose any dexterity bonus to your AC and grants a +2 bonus to the attacker's attack rolls. You move at half speed after you're blinded and suffer a -4 penalty on search checks, so on perception checks, and most strength and dexterity based skill checks. A stunned creature can't act and loses any dexterity bonus to AC. Attackers gain +2 bonus to attack it. Sightless creatures are not affected by collar spray. So, yet again, having your second or third row back, being able to blow this spray at the enemy would be very effective. So after collar spray, we have Nistel's magical aura. Okay, so I see this more of something if you wanted to try to get it by on or confuse the players. So I can see this being very entertaining to use in that way, or if you were trying to dupe out a couple of merchants by selling some stuff. Because the way it is you could change the magical aura of an object or put a magical aura on an object that doesn't have one. It cautions you though, because a regular sword that it has magic put on it would look weird to anyone examining it, because it should be masterwork first. But you could take say a +2 Vorpal sword and make it look like it's a +1 sword. And when the person goes to cast Identify on it, they get a will save to identify that aura. If they fail the save, they don't identify that there is that glamour aura on it, and can then they would identify what they see, which is the aura. Or if they made the save, they could identify what the item really is and its real properties. And if the item's actual aura is especially powerful, as if it's an artifact or an epic weapon, because epic weapons would be an artifact, Nistel's magical aura does not work. So that's how that one works. And then the undetectable aura. It allows you just to hide the aura from detection. If the object has Identify cast on it or is similarly examined, the examiner recognizes that the aura is false and detects the object's actual qualities if he succeeds at a will save. So those two wouldn't be useful on the battlefield. Silent Image. Range is long. That's if you're not putting it on an object. So duration's concentration. So whoever's using it's going to have to concentrate, whether they're a spellcaster or not. So that might be an issue. I'd probably set it to like 5 rounds. and just the object activates and it lasts 5 rounds. This spell creates a visual illusion of any object, creature, or force as visualized by you. The illusion does not create sound, smell, texture, or temperature. You can move the image within the limits of the size of the effect. So, using that as a summon spell and having a fake thing show up next to him would probably be the best use of that. But I don't see that being too useful. It is a first level spell though, so. Ventriloquism. Lasts 1 minute per level. Will disbelief if interacted with. Okay, you can make your voice or any sound that you can normally make vocally seem to issue from someplace else, such as from another creature, a statue, from behind a door, down a passageway, etc. You could speak in any language you know. With respect to such voices and sounds, anyone who hears it and rolls a successful save recognizes the sound as an illusion, but still hears it. So for your strike force, your party entering someplace, I can see that being useful, but for your military, in actual military conflicts, I don't see that being useful on the battlefield. Cause fear. Single target, durations 1d4 rounds, will negates, spell resistance, yes. So if you're using this as ammo like I was describing at the beginning, the ammo would hit them, trigger the spell being a one-shot spell. They'd get to make a will save, and then if they failed, they'd be under the effects of cause fear for 1d4 rounds. The affected creature becomes frightened. It suffers a -2 morale penalty on attack rolls, weapon damage rolls, and saving throws. It flees from you as well as it can. If unable to flee, the creature may fight. Creatures with 6 or more hit dice are immune to cause fear, and cause fear counters remove fear. Note, mind-affecting spells do not affect non-intelligent creatures, and fear spells do not affect undead. And then, of course, constructs are immune to it. So, we have that. Chill touch. Fortitude for partial damage. A touch from your hand which glows with blue energy disrupts the life force of living creatures. Each touch channels negative energy that deals 1d6 points of damage and possibly also 1 point of temporary strength damage. A successful fortitude saving throw negates the strength damage. You can use this melee touch attack up to 1 time per level. The spell has a special effect on undead creatures. Undead touched by you suffer no damage or strength loss, but they must make a successful will saving throw or flee as if panicked for 1d4 plus 1 rounds per caster level. So I didn't know it did that to the undead, so we add that into the factor. That ammo would be twice as useful on the battlefield. If you're fighting regular soldiers, they'd be afraid, they try to flee, if you hit the soldiers that are close to the front that can't flee, they would fight, but they'd fight with lots of penalties, the -2s to everything. But if you hit the undead would panic and flee. So that's pretty useful. So what's the last spell I need to look up for necromancy? Ray of Enfeeblement. So we would put this on ammunition. Otherwise, you're using the effect of the ray. A coruscating ray springs from your hand. You must succeed at a ranged touch attack to strike a target. The subject suffers a -6 enhancement penalty to strength with an additional -1 per 2 caster levels. Maximum of the additional penalty of a -5. So 1d6, so they lose 1d6 and possibly another 5 points if you had it maxed out. From the subject's strength score. The subject's strength score cannot drop below 1. So you could hit the same target over and over again, stacking the effect until their strength drops to 1. This would be very effective against bigger targets. Fighting an ogre, if you could have enough ranged attacks to hit the ogre, like even if you missed half your shots, but you had enough that you could hit him a dozen times within a couple of rounds, you could drop his strength score down so low he can't even pick up his own weapon, and even further down to where the armor will just pin him to the ground, and then he'd be at 1 strength at some point, which would make fighting the bigger creatures a little bit easier. And it's a fortitude save, so keep that in mind too. You might not want to use it on the creatures that would have really good fortitude saves, but military wise, I would use that as a tactic. Give them ammo that is this, and then they can launch that into the middle of the enemy. If they launched a couple of volleys into that middle of the enemy's strength would drop so much that they wouldn't be able to fight back with any effectiveness, and there you created a weak point to break through. And that will end this one. If there's any cool ways you could think to use the spells in a more effective or more entertaining way, let me know in the comments below. Another thing you can do with a lot of spells is put them on as the ammo that we were talking about for slings, and then reduce that down to like BB size. There's a 2nd level spell I think that does that. I'm just looking at the spell list real quick. Shrink item, it's a 3rd level spell. Shrinks it to 1/12 its normal size. So you shrink all those ammunitions you have for the sling, even if they're different types or all the same types. You could load them into a vial, you could load them into a flask, and then based on how many are in there, when it impacts, all those would detonate, and you wouldn't have just one save, you'd have to make a save per bead that activated. So that's also something to think about. So I like to give as many creative ways to use things as I can for everybody to have more fun with the way the spells are used and more entertainment out of the bigger battles. So if there's any cool ways to use these spells we just looked at, let me know in the comments below. Until we all game again, guys.